Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. In Pakistan, Prime Minister Imran Khan and veteran Afghan politician Gulbuddin Hekmatyar have discussed the ongoing Afghan peace process. In a meeting at the Prime Minister's office in Islamabad, the two sides also exchanged views on bilateral ties. The Indian forces have martyred 4 more civilians in occupied Kashmir's Shopian and Pulwama districts. The occupying troops targeted the youths in cordon and search operations. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 442 days. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev says the international community should impose sanctions on Armenia over its aggression in Nagorno-Karabakh. In a televised address, Aliyev said Azerbaijan will liberate its occupied territories from the Armenian occupation. He said Baku has no desire to capture Armenian lands. Russia says it is ready to freeze its nuclear warheads for a year as the precondition to extend the New START treaty with the US. In a statement, Russia's foreign ministry said Moscow will take the decision only if Washington agrees to reciprocate the act. Argentina has become the 5th country to cross 1 million COVID-19 cases with over 26,000 deaths. India has recorded 587 deaths and nearly 47,000 new cases in a day as the case load is approaching 7.6 million. In Pakistan, 14 people have lost their lives to the virus overnight, taking the toll to 6,673. The global COVID-19 deaths has exceeded 1.1 million, while over 40.3 million have contracted the virus so far. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Pakistan, Prime Minister Imran Khan and veteran Afghan politician Gulbuddin Hekmatyar have discussed the ongoing Afghan peace process. In a meeting at the Prime Minister's office in Islamabad, the two sides also exchanged views on bilateral ties. The former Afghan Prime Minister is in Pakistan on a 3-day visit amid Islamabad's push for peace in the war-torn country. This is the second high-level visit from Afghanistan in recent weeks. Last month, head of the Afghan High Peace Council, Abdullah, also visited Pakistan. The high-level visit comes at a time when the Afghan government and the Taliban are engaged in crucial peace talks in Doha. 10 civilians have been killed when the vehicles hit a roadside bomb in Afghanistan's central Maidan Wardak province. The provincial governor's office said the vehicles were en route to Kabul when the incident took place in the Jalraiz district. No group has yet claimed the responsibility for the attack. Meanwhile, the defense ministry said 25 Taliban fighters were killed in Helmand and Nimroz provinces. It said 9 others were injured in the counter-attack. The ministry added that 4 Taliban fighters were killed in airstrikes on Kota Ashro area of Maidan Wardak province. The Taliban have not commented on the defense ministry's claims. The United Kingdom has pledged $90 million in support for Afghan security forces for 2021. Britain's embassy in Kabul said the pledge was made at the Afghan National Army Trust Fund Board plenary meeting in Brussels. In its statement, London strongly condemned the high level of Taliban violence in Afghanistan. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said the bloc has contributed over $3.2 billion to the Afghan security forces so far. At the plenary meeting, NATO reaffirmed its commitment of financial support for sustainable security forces in Afghanistan. Indian forces have martyred 4 more civilians in occupied Kashmir's Shopian and Pulwama districts. The occupying troops targeted the youths during a cordon and search operation. 2 civilians were martyred in Melhora area of the Shopian district, while the other 2 was targeted in Hakripura area of Pulwama. The operations were going on till last reports came in. The occupied valley is under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 442 days. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev says the international community should impose sanctions on Armenia over its aggression in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. In a televised address, Aliyev said Azerbaijan will liberate its occupied territories from the Armenian occupation. He said Baku has no desire to capture Armenian lands. More in this report.
Azerbaijan and Armenia have been engaged in fighting over the disputed Caucasus region since the 27th of September. The area is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but claimed by ethnic Armenians. Azerbaijan says it has retaken several villages in the worst fighting since the 1990s, killing over 750 people. Mounting escalation prompted the world powers to wade into the crisis, urging both sides to exercise restraint. The Minsk group, involving the United States, France and Russia, is spearheading efforts to restore calm in the region. On Saturday, the 2 countries agreed to a Russia-brokered truce, but it could not take hold, with 2 sides accusing each other of ceasefire violations. Turkey and Pakistan have pledged their full support for Azerbaijan against the Armenian aggression. In a phone call with Azerbaijan's counterpart, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi called for a peaceful resolution of the conflict as per UN resolutions.
The UAE and Israel have signed multiple agreements during the first official visit by an Emirati delegation to Tel Aviv. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu signed 4 agreements, including a visa-free travel pact with the UAE. In a tweet, UAE's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hind Al-Otaiba said the delegation is led by Abu Dhabi's economy and finance ministers. Otaiba said the team is also accompanied by U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. He said the 5-hour trip will be restricted to the airport due to the coronavirus concerns. Russia says it is ready to freeze its nuclear warheads for a year as a precondition to extend the new START treaty with the US. In a statement, Russia's foreign ministry said Moscow will take the decision only if Washington agrees to reciprocate the act. Last week, the US rejected a Russian offer to unconditionally extend the pact for 1 year. Moscow and Washington have been at odds over the treaty despite several months of talks. Signed in 2010, New START imposes limits on the 2 countries' strategic nuclear arsenals. The agreement is due to expire in February. Russia has denied US accusations that Moscow is targeting officials and large-scale global events through cyber attacks. The Russian embassy in Washington said the US claims have nothing to do with the reality. Earlier, U.S. federal prosecutors have charged 6 Russian military intelligence officers accused of engaging in cyber attacks. The U.S. Justice Department said the attacks included operations that knocked Ukraine's energy grid offline. In an indictment, the department said Russian cyber attacks also interfered in France's presidential elections. Meanwhile, the UK said Russian hackers tried to disrupt this year's Olympic Games, postponed due to COVID-19. Japan condemned the cyber attacks and said it would emphasize cybersecurity around the Games. Early voting has kicked off in the U.S. state of Florida with barely 2 weeks remaining in the presidential election. A record 30 million Americans have already cast ballots nationwide. More in this report.
The battleground state of Florida can decide the fate of November 3rd presidential election. Pre-poll surveys show Democratic candidate Joe Biden has a lead of 2% over President Donald Trump. In wake of the continuous crosstalk in the last presidential debate between the 2 contenders, the Commission on Presidential Debates has decided to mute the mic of the candidate who speaks out of turn under debate rules. Meanwhile, President Trump headed to the battleground state of Arizona to campaign amid signs that Democrats are leading the surge in early voting.
And this is such an important state. If we win this state, we win it all. This is such an important state. And I happen to love this state.
President Trump also criticized his rival Joe Biden while speaking to the reporters.
He is a criminal. He's a criminal. He got caught, read his laptop, and you know who's a criminal? You're a criminal for not reporting it. You are a criminal for not reporting it. Let me tell you something. Joe Biden is a criminal, and he's been a criminal for a long time, and you're a criminal in the media for not reporting it.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court has declined Republicans' request to not extend the deadline for mail-in absentee ballots in Pennsylvania.
Argentina has become the fifth country to cross 1 million COVID-19 cases with over 26,000 deaths. India has recorded 587 deaths and nearly 47,000 cases in a day as the caseload is approaching 7.6 million. The global COVID-19 deaths has exceeded 1.1 million, while over 40.3 million have contracted the virus so far. More in this report.
As the second wave of the coronavirus surges, governments are finding it increasingly tough to reinforce restrictive measures. The US, India, and Brazil are still the most wrecked countries by the pandemic as it continues to weaken their economy. Latin America is the worst-hit region by COVID-19's economic and social fallout. Rising hospitalizations in Mexico are forcing the government to mull fresh restrictions despite economic woes, while Argentina is the smallest nation by far to reach the grim milestone of 1 million cases.
6,267 people have died from coronavirus in Argentina, with a mortality rate of 2.7% and a specific coronavirus mortality rate of 579 people per million inhabitants.
The situation in Europe is worsening by the day as countries continue to ramp up further restrictions and curfews. Ireland has announced some of Europe's toughest constraints as infections climb again. Hospitals in Spain's capital, Madrid, struggle as the disease-related hospitalization surge in the country. The World Health Organization has warned the next few months will be difficult, especially for Europe.
As the Northern Hemisphere enters winter, we're seeing cases accelerate, particularly in Europe and North America. As cases go up, the number of people needing beds in hospitals and intensive care also increases. Nurses and doctors have a much better understanding of how best to treat people with the virus than they did in the early days of the pandemic.
Meanwhile, South Korea's new cases remained under 100 for the fifth consecutive day. However, health authorities remain vigilant over cluster infections at risk-prone facilities such as hospitals.
In Pakistan, COVID-19 has claimed 14 more lives overnight, pushing the death toll to 6,673. The health ministry says 625 people tested positive for the virus in the past 24 hours. The ministry said there are over 9,400 active coronavirus cases in the country. It said out of over 324,000 countrywide cases, more than 307,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 142,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province. In the capital, Islamabad, some 18,000 cases were recorded, while Punjab has reported more than 101,000 cases. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The UN says Libya's warring sides have resumed military talks in Geneva aimed at ending the country's civil war. The meeting marks the fourth round of talks involving the Joint Military Commission under the auspices of the UN mission. UN organizers say the round is expected to run through Saturday. They hope the two sides will reach a solution to all the outstanding issues. Monday's meeting made up the security aspect of three-track talks, also involving political and economic discussions. The Geneva-based military talks came ahead of an upcoming political forum in Tunisia in November. Last month, the two sides reached the agreements to exchange prisoners and open up air and land transit across the country. Sudan says its removal from a U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism will open the door for debt relief. Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok said the African country has an external debt worth $60 billion. Hamdok thanked U.S. President Donald Trump for the move. He said Sudan looks forward to Trump's official notification to Congress. Earlier, President Trump said Khartoum has agreed to pay $335 million to the U.S. terror victims and their families. President Trump said he will delist Khartoum once the amount is deposited. He said the new Sudanese government is making great progress. In Colombia, thousands of indigenous people took to the Bogota streets to demand an end to violence against socialist leaders and mass killings. The indigenous people are protesting the government's economic and social policies. President Ivan Duque dispatched a delegation of ministers and other high-level officials to hold talks with the indigenous groups. But the leaders declined to meet them, insisting they will only hold talks with the president. The protesters called for policies to guarantee the well-being of Colombians and indigenous people. The EU has extended sanctions against ISIS and Al-Qaeda and their members until 31st of October 2021. In a statement, the EU Council said the decision was taken in light of the ongoing terrorist threat. Sanctions consist of a travel ban to the European Union and an asset freeze for individuals. In addition, EU persons and entities are forbidden from making funds and economic resources available to those listed. The list includes 5 people, 2 Algerians and 3 French nationals. The bloc has been imposing curbs on ISIS and Al-Qaeda as well as organizations associated with them since 2016. The EU says its sanctions regime is independent but complementary to the United Nations sanctions. In Vietnam, the death toll from floods and landslides triggered by heavy rains has risen to 105. Vietnamese authorities said dozens are still missing as the country braces for another spell of rain from Sodal storm. Vietnam's Met Authority says Storm Sodal will make landfall in 4 days. Disaster management officials say the floods destroyed nearly 7,000 hectares of crops and killed 700,000 farm animals. Last week, the landslides killed 35 rescue officials and military personnel in 2 separate accidents at a hydropower plant. The rescue work is still underway for 15 missing workers at a hydropower plant. In the U.S. state of Colorado, thousands of firefighters are struggling to control the state's largest wildfire on record. The blaze grew markedly during the last few days, with smoke drifting over the drought-stricken state. The sheriff's office says new fires continue to erupt. A blaze burned some 8,800 acres and razed at least 26 homes. The latest figures from the U.S. Drought Monitor show the entire state of Colorado is at some level of drought. Officials say this is contributing to the wildfires in the area. The Cameron Peak fire has so far scorched over 203,000 acres in the Arapaho and Roosevelt National Forests. With more than 50 structures destroyed, another 50,000 are threatened, and almost 13,000 people have been evacuated. A blanket of smog engulfed the Indian capital as air quality dipped, causing breathing difficulties to the residents. The U.S. Embassy in New Delhi showed the air quality index at unhealthy category, with the reading at 184. A level of 50 or less is considered safe. People said they could feel the change in the air quality as it was making them feel suffocated. After months of relatively clean air because of a lockdown imposed to fight the virus, pollution levels have spiked to the worst in 2 years for October. An 80-year-old retired British Army major is raising money for a hospice by rowing a handmade boat. Find out how in this report.
Michael Stanley, also known as Major Mick, is attempting to row 100 miles in a boat he built from corrugated iron. He wants to collect funds following in the footsteps of record-breaking fundraiser Captain Tom Moore. The 100-year-old captain raised nearly $43 million by walking 100 laps in his garden.
The idea came from India. The children on the rivers there have similar sort of boats made out of corrugated iron, and it was an idea that I had in my mind when the lockdown came, and so yes, I thought I'll buy 2 sheets of corrugated iron and hopefully make it float like a boat.
Stanley started rowing the boat, which he has named Titanic, along the Chichester Canal in West Sussex, southern England last month. He's worked out the boat travels around 2 miles an hour by completing a 3-mile trip in around 90 minutes.
Well, I'm doing it for St Wilfrid's Hospice. They've been here for 30 years and have served a large community around Chichester for all those years, and I'm very keen that we should support them so that they don't they're not threatened to closure, because the hospice requires something like $7.7 million a year.
Major Mick has already raised over $15,000.
Archaeologists have found a figure of a giant cat etched into a hillside in southern Peru. Researchers say the figure was drawn by piling up rocks. Drone footage provides a bird's eye view of the 37-meter-long figure drawn by creating furrows in the hillsides. The archaeologists restored the lines to their former glory after 2,000 years of erosion had left them hidden from view. Nazca lines were declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1994.
The figure was in the process of disappearing due to the fact that it is on a hillside and is more than 2,000 years old. And the erosion had been very strong, so this has basically allowed it to remain hidden for many years. We hadn't been able to see it during all this time.
OPEC and allies have pledged action to support the oil market. This comes amid mounting concerns over a second wave of COVID-19 pandemic. The group said worries of second wave will hobble demand. It said an earlier plan to raise output from next year will further depress prices. OPEC's biggest member, Saudi Arabia, said no one should doubt the group's commitment to providing support. While India reports claim a planned output increase from January could be reversed if necessary. OPEC and its allies, including Russia, have curbed output since January 2017 to try to support prices and reduce inventories. Most stocks in Europe have gained in today's trading so far. Investors are taking a cautious approach amid rising COVID-19 cases and the deadline for the US fiscal stimulus approaching. The Pan-European Stock 600 has inched above the flat line. London's FTSE 100 has edged up as well. In Italy, the FTSE MIB has added over 0.5%. The CAC 40 in Paris has also added more than 0.5%. But Frankfurt's DAX has slipped marginally. Earlier, all Asian markets traded mixed, with Japanese and Australian bourses shedding while all other stocks gained. In football, West Brom and Burnley have played a goalless draw in the Premier League's first goalless fixture at the Hawthorns Stadium. The result means Burnley have their first point on the board, but they remain in the bottom 3 after 4 games, while West Brom are above the relegation zone with only 2 points. Both the teams have yet to register a victory in this season so far. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.